Well, as I mentioned, it's only a few weeks, 4 weeks, until we are observing the Feast of Tabernacles. So the fall holy days are upon us, and as we do for the spring holy days, we prepare for the fall holy days, and we understand what those mean in God's plan. And as we look forward to those days, I know we'll be reading through some of the prophetic books and some of the prophecies in the Bible as we tune our mind into the return of Jesus Christ, what that means for this world, what the coming of kingdom of God will be like, and the millennium that we'll picture when we're at the Feast of Tabernacles. You know, the world around us grows worse and worse, as it seems, and so as we head into the holy days this year, you know, we should be thinking more about Jesus Christ's return and what it means. You know, I know on the minds of, I think, several people in the world is how long is the world going to last? Is the world coming to an end? What is the prognosis for the world, given everything that's going on in it? And people have asked that question down through the ages. You know, the Mayans had a calendar that was the focus of a lot of attention back a few years ago, where they had a calendar that they predicted when the end of the world would be. And recently we've had other people who have predicted this thing and predicted that thing. Back when the calendar was changing to the year 2000, there were many people thought the world would end at that time, and that was the end of mankind's time on earth. You know, even Sir Isaac Newton has gotten involved, you know, when he was alive in predicting the end of time. As he went through the Bible and he tried to calculate things and look at the patterns of numbers, he came up with a date that he said the world would end by. And interestingly enough, it's in the 21st century. I'm not going to tell you the date. If you're interested, you can look it up. I don't put any more stock into it than I do anything else that you read on the internet or that people might predict. But everyone has been interested in it down through the ages. Even the disciples back at Christ's time were interested. When will it be that you return, and what is it going to be like when this age ends? Let's turn back to Matthew 24. Now, Christ had spent 3.5 years walking with the disciples. They heard him talk. They knew what he was focused on. They heard him talk about the kingdom of God. They didn't understand everything, but they did understand that the age we live in would come to an end. In Matthew 24, and verse 3 says, as Christ sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Not the end of the world, but the end of the age. This age that we live in, the time that Jesus Christ lived in, the Christian era, if you will. We talked about dispensations and ages back a few years ago, and the seven that are in the Bible. The coming one would be the millennium of God, and that age that is coming. And they said, what's it going to be like? What's it going to be like when this age ends? And then Jesus Christ goes through a pretty detailed prophecy here of what is going to happen before his return. He talks about famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. He talks about wars and rumors of wars. He talks about people turning against each other. He talks about false religion and false Christianity. And he paints a dire picture of what it is going to be like as he comes down through the chapter here. And he talks about a great tribulation down here in verse 21, as the world gets closer and closer and closer to the time of his return and the end of this age that the disciples have asked him about. Verse 21, it says, there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. What he means is saved alive. The newer translations have it appropriately translated. It's like no flesh would survive. There wouldn't be any survival on the earth unless those days were shortened. But he says, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. If those days weren't shortened, no flesh would survive. But for the elect's sake, that's the saints, the people of God, first fruits, you and me. For our sakes, those days will be shortened. What was Christ saying? When he returns to earth, what is he doing? Is he putting an end to this age, or is it that mankind, living the lives that he has and making the choices that we make, is he saving mankind from destroying himself? Well, today I want to look at a few things and grab some things from the headlines and ask ourselves the question, why do we need Christ to return? We want Christ to return. We expect him to return. But why does the world need Christ to return? He said, unless those days are shortened, no flesh would survive. Well, let's explore that a little bit today as we head into the fall holy days, but let's begin back at the beginning and see where the beginning of this world is and this society back in Genesis. You can be turning to Genesis 3, and as you turn there, I'll just briefly recount what the beginning was. Of course, we know that God created Adam and Eve and everything in the world in 6 days. On the seventh day, he created the seventh day by resting on it, and he sanctioned it for all of mankind. We know that for some time there in the Garden of Eden, man, God, creation, they were all in harmony. Everything was at peace. Everything was in unity. It was a perfect world. Everything was there, and Adam and Eve lived in a virtual paradise. They had it all. And somewhere along the line, then God allowed Satan to enter into the picture. And he had told Adam and Eve, take of the tree of life, don't take of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But Adam and Eve did what the pattern of mankind has been since they made their decision. They chose their way over God's way. And so began, at the time they made that decision, the world that we know today. In Genesis 3, beginning in verse 16, I'm not going to read verses 16 and 17, but God put some curses, if you will, on man and woman for what they have done. He says, you've made this decision. You've rejected me. You want to do things your own way. And he said to the woman, you're going to bring forth children in pain from here on out. To Adam, he said, the ground is going to be cursed. It's going to bring forth weeds, thorns, thistles. We're going to work hard for the food that you have and that you do. And that's what the curse is going to be. And then in verse 22, it says, the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us to know good and evil. He wasn't God, but he wanted to make himself God. He wanted to be the one who would decide, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is the way I'm going to go. Forget what you said, God, I'll choose my way. Under the influence, as he was led by Satan, God said, behold, man's become like one of us to know good and evil. And now, lest he put out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever, therefore the Lord God sent him out of the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to guard the way to the tree of life. And so a new age of man began. Out of the Garden of Eden, no longer under the willing control or willing obedience to God, now serving another God. And at the time that they were put out, the cherubim were put there, no way back to Eden. No way back to the perfect unity, peace, harmony, and everything good that was part of that Garden of Eden before mankind made his choice. No way back except through the Messiah, the prophesied Messiah, Jesus Christ. The prophesied Messiah, Jesus Christ, who God has called us. We believe in him, we repent, we receive the Holy Spirit, and through that door we can enter into eternal life. The only way back, but mankind now for 6,000 years is going to be on his own, if you will, marching to the beat of the drummer that he decided he would follow. Not under God's, not listening to God, not following him, but instead following this other being that they chose. Now, somewhere along the line, God did instruct Adam and Eve about the things to do. We have a very abbreviated version here of what went on. We don't know all the details of what went on in the Garden of Eden. We don't even know how long exactly Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. We know that God, somewhere along the line, taught them about things. He taught them about how to till the ground. He taught them about what the earth could do. They didn't have instinct like the animals did. They just didn't automatically know that if you plant the seed in the ground, it'll grow, and how to tend it and how to till it. They didn't know about plowing. God taught them all those things along the way, because when you go into chapter 4 and you see children being born, you see that Cain, what does he do? He grows crops. He knows how to do that. You see Abel, and he's raising flocks. They know how to feed themselves. Somewhere along the line, God taught them those things, and they used the earth for what God created it for. Because man was formed from the dust of the ground, and man and earth, the physical earth, are together, and we learn things from the earth just like we talk about often. We learn things by watching the world around us. We learn from the butterflies that we see. We learn things from the grapevines and the lessons that Jesus Christ has taught us. If we know the earth, what God has created, we can learn a lot about us and our spiritual life as well. God also probably taught them that what you plant, what you sow, you will reap. And it reminds us of that. Let's go back to Galatians 6. A basic principle of life and a basic principle of the world we live in. Galatians 6, and let's pick it up in verse 7. Just read a couple of verses here in Galatians 6 as we set the tone for what we will talk about here in a minute. Galatians 6, verse 7. Under inspiration from God, Paul writes, "Don't be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap." Same principle in the earth. Can't plant the bean seed and expect corn to come up from it. If you plant the bean seed, you're going to get a bean plant. What we plant in life and what we sow in life, we're going to get that back in return. That's simply the way it goes. No other way. Just like it works with the physical earth, so it works with us. God goes on and says, "He who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." Now, those who God calls today have the opportunity to sow to the Spirit. Not everyone has that opportunity today. Somewhere in history, everyone will have that opportunity at the point in time that God ordains for them to have that. But for you and me, it's today. We can choose to either sow to the flesh or we can choose to sow to the Spirit. Whatever we sow, we will reap. Back in Psalm 81, the same concept is listed back there in the Old Testament. Let's go back to Psalm 81. Psalm 81, and let's pick it up in verse 8. This is directed to Israel, God's physical people. The same words would apply to God's spiritual people and us today. Psalm 81 in verse 8 says, "Hear, O my people, and I'll admonish you. O Israel, if you would just listen, or if you will listen to me." And he says, "There shall be no foreign god among you, nor shall you worship any foreign god. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it." You're looking for something? You need something? Look to me. I'll provide what you need. Verse 11, "But my people would not heed my voice, and Israel would have none of me." They didn't want to hear what God had to say, just like Adam and Eve chose another way. They didn't choose God. They didn't want to hear what he had to say. He would have given them everything. They could have stayed in Eden forever. They would have had everlasting life. They chose another way. "My people wouldn't heed me. Israel would have none of me. So I gave them over to their own stubborn heart to walk in their own counsels." They didn't want my counsel. They wanted to do things their way. And so God lets us do things our way. When we make a choice to do our way over his way, he doesn't, come back at us, slap us, and force us to do things his way. He lets it happen. When mankind made the choice to follow Satan, he gave them 6,000 years to see how that would work out, to see what the end would be like, so they would learn their lesson. When we do this is what turns out not always good. But when we follow God, we learn things are good. My dad, most of your parents, I'm sure, taught you the same thing. He would always say, there's two ways in life to learn things. You can learn it by my experience and other people's experience and not make the same mistakes they did, or you can learn it the hard way. All too often we learn things the hard way, don't we? Got to learn it ourselves and think, if I had just listened, I could have saved myself a lot of angst. I could have saved myself a lot of sleepless nights if I had just done it the way that it was supposed to be done. And God says the same things. He doesn't force us to live his way, and he doesn't get involved. It's like, we choose that, live your way of life. And so he gave mankind 6,000 years. Go ahead and live the life that you've chosen, and we'll see how it ends. Well, God knew how it would end. He didn't have to intervene. He knows what the results of our choices will make when we don't choose the things that he wants. And so mankind lived that way. And if you pay attention to how the people that calculate all these things, about 1,500 years into man's existence, God looked down on mankind and he said, they're a mess. They're a mess. There's corruption and there's violence everywhere. It's so bad, I'm going to destroy them. And God sent a flood on the earth because it was so bad what had happened that he wanted to not see it anymore. And he destroyed all life on earth, except for Noah and his family. When God destroyed the earth, he said, after that, I won't destroy the earth again. I won't destroy it again. You know, God knew that mankind, if he was going to make the choices he made, mankind would do his own job at destroying the earth. He knew that if mankind left to his own devices, that eventually the earth would fade away. Eventually mankind wouldn't survive, because life only comes from living God's way. It doesn't come from doing our own thing. Back in Revelation 11, as Jesus Christ is preparing to return, and many times in Revelation that we have the hosts of heaven, in this passage in verses 17 and 18, the 24 elders praising God, Jesus Christ, for what he has done and for coming back to earth. They say this in Revelation 11 and verse 17. It says, we give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, the one who is and who was and who is to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. The nations were angry, and your wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great. It's time for the days to be shortened. It's time for the return of Jesus Christ. It's time for you to come back to earth, and that for the elect's sake, you come back and you save mankind from himself, and you bring in the kingdom that we've been waited for. And that last line there, and that you should destroy those who destroy the earth. You would destroy those who destroy the earth. Because then I want to talk about just a couple things and pluck a couple of headlines from today's news that, have been overshadowed a little bit over the last couple of days with hurricane news, and talk about those and talk about the earth we live in. Why Jesus Christ needs to return, what mankind has done to himself. And we see it in the news around us if we're paying attention, and we can see some of the hopelessness in the world around us when we look at the facts behind the headlines or when we look at the headlines. Recently it's been in the news about this rainforest, the Amazon area. I'm sure you've all heard of that, right? The Amazon burning and everything. And you've seen the pictures of these tremendous areas that are burning. And some reports say it's twice the size of Rhode Island. Others say what's burning is the size of the state of New Jersey. It's mind-boggling when you think of the areas that we're talking about there. And I don't know, in today's news, you can only, you listen to what you hear. You don't know if all that is factual or not. But the Amazon burning has been a thing of sensation. It's been on there. Even when I was up in Cincinnati, we heard a little bit about the rainforest. I wasn't able to listen to the news every day up there about what's going on. But it's raised this whole question again about climate and what is man doing to the earth that God has placed us on. We hear about the things and how important the rainforest is. And I hope that you've been able to see maybe some of the aerial views of the rainforest. It's absolutely beautiful when they show that on there and what it is. And it's always been there. Some people call that area of South America the lungs of the earth. And they say that, again, how scientists come up with this information, I have no idea, but they say 20% of Earth's oxygen comes from that area of the world. I have no reason to disbelieve it. I can't prove it, but I've read it in a few places. If I read it more than 2 or 3 times, I think it must be factual. So the world is interested in what's going on down there in the Amazon because it affects all of us. And really, I guess, since the beginning of time, these rainforests have been there. Man hasn't tampered with it. But now, all of a sudden, we have these fires. And I know that every year there are fires, natural things that come out, just like they would hear about the California wildfires and the things in Arizona and out west. But they say, and again, I quote, they say that this year is beyond what the norm is. And there's been some 80,000 fires that have gone on down there. And the whole world, even the recent, convention or whatever, the gathering of the world leaders over in Europe, pledged some money to support that down there because of what is going on. It was that important that they need to be brought under control. You read some reports, and most reports will say it's beyond what the normal burn-off is. There are times when there are lightning strikes down in that area. It burns off some of the forest. That's natural, but this year is different, they say. This year they say 99, well, some reports say 99%, some say 80% of the fires that are going on down there have been caused by man, as they try to clear out the area and as they try to turn that area of the rainforest into pasture land. And so you read these things, and it has stemmed all of these talks about climate control, what's going on with our earth, and all the things that we hear about all the time that pop into the news, and no one knows whether global warming is really a real thing or not. Some say yes it is, some say no it's not. It's an issue. Some say the rainforest is burning at a far greater rate this year than it ever has before, and if it continues without intervention, we're going to have a real problem. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's in the news, and it's something for us to think about. All I know is that it's not God. It's not God, according to all the sources that have caused those fires in the rainforest. It's not God who has created global warming, if it is indeed global warming. It has happened at the hand of man. He has abused the earth. He has abused his time on earth. He hasn't paid attention to the earth that God gave us in the way that God would have us do. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, he told them, you dress and you tend it. And he told them when they went out into the earth, you keep it, you dress it, you work it. And you will till the ground and you will live off the ground. Treat it because it is your life, your physical life, and we need that earth. Has mankind done that? It's interesting when you read about the flood and you look at why God destroyed the earth the first time. It wasn't the people on earth at that time weren't having problems. You don't read about famines, you don't read about pestilences, you read about corruption, you read about violence, and God looked down and said, they've corrupted themselves, we need to start over. Could it be that mankind was at least not destroying the earth during those first 1,500 years? Were they paying attention to the laws that God gave, that he reminded Israel when they came out of Egypt, of how to till the soil, what the agriculture should be like, how you treat the land? Were they paying attention to it during that time? Were they corrupting it at that time? I don't know. I know that now, that whatever you read in the Bible about how to take care of the land, mankind isn't doing it. They don't do it in America. They don't do it anywhere in the world. It's all disregarded. What will happen to the world? What will happen to the world if the rainforests disappear? I don't know the answer. No one knows the answer. Will we all be gasping for air? Will we all be a little sicker because those trees are gone that God planted there? I don't know. What will happen if there's really global warming? What will happen in 20 or 30 years? And they say that some of the coastlines, 20 or 30 miles inland of Florida and other places, will just no longer be there. Will that really happen? What happens if the polar ice caps melt? What will be the effect of that? Will it be God who's doing that, or will it be man who has done that? God gave man the earth. Jesus Christ is coming back to earth, and he will destroy those who destroy the earth. Back in the Old Testament, a couple places, let's go back to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 2. Jeremiah 2, we will pick it up. Let's pick it up in verse 5. When you look up some of the things that Israel did, when you look up agriculture and in the Bible and look at some of the verses of what God says, it's interesting to see what he says. Here in Jeremiah 2, verse 5, it says, thus says the Eternal, what injustice have your fathers found in me, that they have gone far from me? What did I do to them? Did I lead them astray? Did I not give them something that they should? What injustice have they done that they turned against me, that they followed idols and have become idolaters? Neither did they say, where is the Lord, who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, who led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and pits, through a land of drought and the shadow of death, through a land that no one crossed and where no one dwelt. Why don't they remember those things, what I did to them? Verse 7, I brought you into a bountiful country, to eat its fruit and its goodness. But when you entered, you defiled my land and made my heritage an abomination. You defiled my land. Well, they did that by honoring false gods. They did that by setting up altars and false sacrifices and honoring a different god. But they defiled the land. Certainly with those things, did they also defile the land? I mean, God says, I gave you all these things to eat. Look what you did. Look what you did, Israel. Look what you did, Judah. Back in Isaiah 24. Isaiah 24 and verse 4. It says the earth mourns. God talks about the earth here in a human type sense. The earth mourns. It's not happy. It's not joyous like the earth should be, not being treated the way that it should be treated. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth languish. Verse 5, the earth is also defiled under its inhabitants because they've transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant. They changed the laws I gave them, all the laws. Not just the Ten Commandments, not just the statutes and ordinances that would govern the way that they live, they treat each other, the love they should have for one another, the way they behave, but also those laws that are there on how to work with the land, how to do the things that God said. Therefore, the curse that we talked about back in Genesis 3, verse 17, therefore the curse has devoured the earth, and those who dwell in it are desolate. They defiled the land. They broke the covenant. They didn't do things the way they were told. God didn't make that decision for them to do things different the way he said. Mankind did it. They made the choice. They'll pay the consequences. Because God said, if you want to live that way, then have at it. Have at it, and we'll see what the ends of that way are. And so, some 6,000 years down the road, we look at the world around us, and we see problems with the earth. We see these continual news stories about climate change and the controversy over, is it true, is it not true? What do we believe, what don't we believe? Is it really happening? It's pretty warm in here today. Pretty warm outside today. Pretty warm in a lot of places around the world today. Did God do that? Or does man do it? You know, we live in a world, when I was growing up, I'm very happy that my mom's family, were farmers. And we were able to spend, not a lot of time, but enough time down on the farm. So I understood when I was growing up what it means to have livestock and how you have to take care of them, to understand about sowing and plowing and caring for the earth and seeing the gardens and all the food that came out of it and seeing how they handled the land they had. They didn't keep the land laws of the Bible or anything like that, but they weren't in the church, my mom's family. They didn't keep the Sabbath, they didn't keep the holy days, but one thing they had a healthy respect for God. And they knew as they would till that land each year that there was a God, because it would be him who gave them the rain, it would be him who gave them the crops. It wasn't going to be by their hand. They would go through the motions, but they knew that all those motions in the world, unless God gave that blessing and that produce, their efforts were in vain. There was that connection between God and earth, even though they didn't know the truth of God. And somewhere along the line, over the last 50-some years since I've been down on that farm, the earth has changed. The world has changed. There's not that many farms anymore. Things have different. The way meat is slaughtered is different. The way meat is processed is different. The way you grow chickens is different. There's not as much farmland. There's a lot of engineered crops. There's a lot of genetically modified crops. There's a lot of chemicals and a lot of fertilizers that are there that create problems for some in our food supply. And we see a world that's much different than what God had intended it to be, as mankind has taken matters into his own hands. And, we can watch the TV commercials on, and we see attorneys advertising, if you've ever used this product, this chemical, call us, and if you've gotten this diagnosis, we can do something for you. As we watch a world around us try to fix all the things that God, if they had just paid attention to God, would be. And so in the New Testament times, we read about famines and pestilences, and Christ talked about famines and pestilences that would come in the end time. And we are constantly looking for new ways to have increased crops, because people don't want to farm anymore. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They want to be apart from that. They just want to go to Publix and take the shopping cart and put that stuff in the cart and take it home and not have to deal with any of that stuff that has to do with the earth. Who wants to get their hands dirty, right? And along the line, we've lost something. Mankind has lost something of that. And I was reading, I think I might have put this in a letter back, several months ago. I was reading about, as psychologists try to figure out about depression and how young people especially have problems. And so they're developing these therapy farms, where instead of going to a hospital or inside, they'd send them to a farm. And it's a therapy farm where they have the classes and they do their counseling, but they have to be outside. They have to deal with agriculture. They have to be around plants. And one of the people said, one of the things I found, he said, if I get clean black dirt, and if the person who's depressed will just hold that dirt in his hand for 20 minutes, just 20 minutes, his attitude improves. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. I know sometimes when I'm down, the thing that perks me back up is I go out and work in the yard. It's always been my thing. If I'm having a bad day, or if I just feel down, I go outside and I come back in. I hope Debbie notices this, a different person. So it's just something about being outside, and that kind of cheers me up and gets me out of whatever the problem is. There's something about the earth, and more we get away from it, and more mankind destroys the earth. When Jesus Christ returns, the earth won't be the way it is now. We're beginning to reap what we've sown. And if we take a line and if we can just think about what would it be like 20, 30, 50 years from now, when some of the scientists say 50 years from now, mankind might even be able to survive on this earth. With what we've done to the ozone layer, with what's gone on in global warming, with everything we've done, the earth may no longer be fit for mankind to live on it. Whether that's true, I have no idea. But if Jesus Christ didn't return to earth, what would happen to mankind? He said no flesh would survive. Maybe through war, maybe through nuclear annihilation, maybe through lack of paying attention to the earth, maybe whatever, but he said mankind wouldn't survive, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. I will return and I will save mankind from the inevitable end that they have been walking on all these years, as they have decided to take their way and not mine. Well, let's go back and look at a few things about what the world will be like after Christ returns. Let's go to Micah. We're in Jeremiah. A few books forward is the book of Micah, one of the minor prophets. Micah 4. Wherever you go to the Feast of Tabernacles, you may hear these 4 verses read again when you're up there. Matthew 4, verse 1, "It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house will be established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and peoples will flow to it. Many nations will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, we will walk in his paths, for out of Zion the law will go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem.'" The opposite of what is happening today, when no one wants to hear anything of God's word, when people want to run from the Bible, when people want to hear anything but it, in that day they will be seeking it. "He will judge," verse 3, "between many peoples, and he rebukes strong nations afar off. They'll beat their swords into plowshares." What do we use plowshares for? Well, we use that in working with the ground, right? We use that in agriculture. Won't be beating the swords into computers, won't be beating the swords into car frames or whatever. They'll beat their swords into plowshares. They'll beat their spears into pruning hooks. Nation won't lift up sword against nation, and they won't learn war anymore. But everyone, verse 4, will sit under his vine and under his fig tree. They'll be part of nature. They'll have they won't be living in apartments and condos where they might have a potted plant out and think that's about all the nature they want to deal with. They'll be sitting under their own vine and their own fig tree. It'll be part of life. Living with the earth, learning the things from the earth, learning the spiritual that we can learn from the things of the earth as well. The things that we've gotten so far away from that even as we read the Bible, we have to look up and see what was it like in those times? What was Christ trying to draw the analogies of that they knew that we don't have any idea what those analogies are? In those days, it'll be a different society, not like the societies that we have today. Let's go back a few books to Amos. Amos 9. Amos 9, verse 13. Behold, the days are coming, says the Eternal, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper. There will be so many crops in the field that before they can even harvest all of them, it'll be time to plow and plant new crops. You ever hear about that happening today? Can you foresee a time in our future, without God's intervention, without Jesus Christ returning to earth, that would ever take place on this earth again? That the plowman would overtake the reaper before they can even get the crops in, it's time to plant again. That much food. And the treader of grapes, him who sows seed. Same thing with the grapes. So many grapes, they can't even get them all treaded, whatever the word is. And those who sow seed. They're just running into each other. It's so plentiful, it's so bounteous. Why? Because mankind had a better idea than God? Or because they're now doing things God's way. Now they're doing things the way God said to do it, and look what the results are. The mountains shall drip with sweet wine. Drip with sweet wine. All the hills will flow with it. In verse 14, he talks about bringing his people back. At the second part of verse 14 there, it says, they will plant vineyards and drink wine from them. That's what they'll do. It won't be a society based on technology and all the things apart. It'll be a society that's based, an agriculturally based society. The way it was, even when God turned Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. And they went out into the land, and Cain and Abel were doing the things they had to do that God instructed them. They will plant vineyards and drink wine from them. They will make gardens and eat fruit from them. They're going to learn those things. They're going to learn. You came from the dust of the ground. The earth and you can live together. They can be in harmony. It'll be a time where God, people, and creation are at harmony again. As we look at the world around us, is there any way that could happen without Jesus Christ returning? There's no way. There's no way in any part of the world that can happen. We've gone too far. We've gone too far, and if you draw the line out to where it is, we realize there is no long-term hope for mankind. He will eventually destroy the earth, and mankind will cease to exist on just that one thing if Jesus Christ didn't return. Well, let's look at one more thing that we can grab from the headlines today and draw some conclusions as to where things have changed from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. One of the things that we hear almost every week is about a mass shooting, right? It's almost become commonplace. You know, it's almost not even a surprise anymore to hear that someone has gone in and, they shoot up a Walmart as they did in El Paso a few weeks ago. And someone else tries to do it, and once in a while we hear about where they've been intercepted and they weren't able to carry out what they thought they were planning to do. And as we watch those things, and we live in a society now when we go out to our grocery store or department store, wherever we go, we don't really know anymore. I don't think any of us are living in fear yet. But if those things continue, we don't really know that we're going to come back, except for the protection that God gives us, from where it is, because random violence is popping up everywhere, in every state. We have violence that's just for no reason. It's senseless when you look at it. And we hear about it almost every day. And it continues to increase. We have people driving their cars into groups of people just so they can kill someone. And we have people that have a deranged mind who for some reason think that that's the thing to do. They feel bad, and if they can make someone else suffer, they feel better. And if they die in the process, they just don't care. They just don't care. And that's the world we live in today. It wasn't like that. We had incidents before of that, things going on like that, but not the way we do today. And there's no reason to believe that it's going to get better anytime soon. If anything, it seems to escalate in the way that it goes on. That violence is one of the reasons that God destroyed the earth back at the time of the flood. Let's go back to Genesis 6, and let's look at the words that God said when he brought that destruction on the earth at that time. In Genesis 6, and verse 11, it says the earth was corrupt. The earth was corrupt, and everything that means. The earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. They did it. Their choices brought that upon themselves. God didn't corrupt them. God didn't close their minds and make them do the things that they did. They made those choices, and when they departed from God, they made choices that were wrong. They corrupted their way on the earth. And the result of what happened back at that time, God said, I'm sorry I ever made man. Look how bad it's become. We'll start over with the one man on earth and his family who is living my way of life. And Christ said, as it was in the days of Noah, it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. So, as we see violence and we see corruption, we don't even have to get into corruption. We can talk about injustice. We can talk about the things that go on in the world. We know it's there. It's Satan's world. It's the thing that man has decided to do. They've decided to follow someone different than God. You and I aren't going to change that. That's what mankind has decided to do. Let's go back and let's look at what some of those ways of flesh apart from God are. Galatians, I'll have you read Galatians 5. You know verse 19. That's the works of the flesh. Let's go instead to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy. The latter part of those verses in Galatians 5, verse 19, talks about hatred and violence and murders and everything. And in chapter 3 of 2 Timothy, under inspiration from God, Paul writes this to Timothy. He says, know this, in the last days, perilous times will come. It's not going to be a safe place. It'll be a perilous place. Men will be lovers of themselves. Men will be lovers of money. Men will be boasters. Men will be proud. Men will be blasphemers. People will be disobedient to parents. They will be unthankful. They will be unholy. They will be unloving. They will be unforgiving. They'll be slanderers. They'll use their words to attack other people. They will be without self-control. Even when the impulse is bad, they will just yield to it because they can't tell themselves, this is silly. I'm going to drive my car into this group of people. What am I thinking? I'm going to take a gun and shoot up a bunch of innocent people just to make me feel better? You don't even have the self-control to say no to that? They have no self-control. They're brutal. They're despisers of good. And you know, the original translation says, it's the despisers of those who are good. They hate good. They hate those who are good and trying to live that way of life. They'll be traitors, they'll be headstrong, they'll be haughty, they'll be lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. That's the world we live in today, but not the world that would be if we take a line and look at where it has been from 5 years ago, out and draw that line out 10, 15 years, 5 years, whatever you want to be. Is it going to get any better? Does anyone think here it's going to get any better before Jesus Christ returns? It has gotten progressively worse, and he says this is what's going to be at the time of the end. Mankind has corrupted himself, or corrupted themselves on the earth. Back in Romans 1. God here inspiring Paul to write what happens when mankind decides they don't want God anymore. Romans 1, verse 28. Even as they didn't like to retain God in their knowledge. Adam and Eve didn't want God in their knowledge anymore. Cain didn't want God in his knowledge anymore. People today don't want God in their knowledge anymore. Even as they didn't like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind. The original word there in the King James was reprobate mind. It's a sick mind. It's a deviant mind. It has no soundness in it anymore. God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. They're filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, and unmerciful. Not one valid trait in that list. Man apart from God, sowing the things to the flesh, and then allowing the flesh to dictate as they follow the God of this world, the God that mankind chose to follow. And so when we look at the world around us today and we see the violence and we see the hatred and we hear the hatred every day. I mean, we turn the news on, we hear hatred in ways that we've never heard it on the news before. And it's hatred. It's not just political disagreements, it's hatred on both sides. I heard one person say they just don't understand the hatred. I think we can understand the hatred because the God of this world hates, and he infuses the hatred. And as the world comes closer and closer to the time that Jesus Christ returns, that hatred will increase. When Jesus Christ was on the earth, they hated him. They hated him. He was of God. They hated him, even though he did everything good. Haters of those who do good, despisers of those who do good. Who of us has done as good, much good as Jesus Christ did when he was in the world? They hated him. That's the way of the world. That's the way of the God that the world chooses. When Adam and Eve made a choice, God said, you do your thing, follow who you want to follow. We'll see what happens down the road. And so today we see those things as things crank up and as the time grows near, and you're probably thinking of Revelation 12 where it says when God sends Satan back down to earth, woe. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. And so we see violence, so we see hatred. And if we don't watch ourselves, we can find ourselves not, I sure hope we all have self-control, that we wouldn't be part and parley to any of this that's going on out there. As we watch the words that are said and broadcast nightly on every news channel I've watched, we could find ourselves talking in ways that we shouldn't be talking. It's the way of the world. The things that have happened, the injustices in the world, and they are many. They are many. They're not of God. It didn't happen in God's world. It happened in man's world with the choices that he made. It won't change as long as man is in control, but if we draw the line down to where it is, we will see that mankind, with the violence and the hatred that would lead to wars and nuclear annihilation down the end, that would all happen in the name of hatred, jealousy, envy, lust, and greed. All those works of the flesh. If Christ didn't return, could mankind survive? How long would he survive? Would the world go on forever, just fine without Jesus Christ's return? Or somewhere down the road, maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe not in our children's lifetimes, but somewhere down the line, would the earth and mankind cease to exist without the intervention of Jesus Christ? If we're thinking, if we're realistic, we would know, no, the world cannot survive. And so we see people around us today, and many among the young people who just see hopelessness. What is the world going to be like in 20 years? What's it going to be like when I'm 50 and 60 and 70 years old? Will it even be here anymore? Will America be here anymore? You know, we could talk about America all day long. Christ said, a nation divided or a house divided against itself can't stand. Matthew 22:25. A house divided against itself can't stand. What do we see in the world around us? We see division like we've never seen it before. Can it go back to the way it was even 10 years ago? Has the national conscience been seared? Can it happen without Jesus Christ, or is it an ever-increasing line until the time he chooses to return and save mankind from himself? I didn't write down the quote from Abraham Lincoln. You've all heard the quote. It's been said sometimes, throughout the years in sermons and certainly on newscasts or around Thanksgiving. But Abraham Lincoln once said, and I'm paraphrasing, if America falls, it won't be because of an outside force that kills it. If America falls, it'll come within. America will commit suicide. He actually used the word suicide in his actual quote there. America will fall from within. We are our own worst enemies, he said. Prophetic, but in line with what the Bible would say. In line with what the Bible would say. So we have a world that in some cases is feeling hopeless. They're searching for answers. All these things, all these arguments over what we can do, how things can be better. How do we save the world from itself? How do we stop the process that we've been in? And so people protest, and so people, sign petitions. None of that's going to make a difference. There isn't an answer anywhere in this American government of what needs to happen. There just simply isn't. We can take it beyond America. Look at the world around us. Do you ever foresee a time when two nations such as Iran and Israel would ever be at peace with one another? Could that happen? They hate each other. You listen to the rhetoric coming out of it. Iran is very clear. We want Israel destroyed. We would like America destroyed. We hate them. And they teach their children to hate them and us. Will that change? What about North Korea and Russia? Do they really want to be our friends? Or are they just looking for an opportunity to do whatever they're doing with a real end in mind? It's not an honest world we live in. It's not a world where people are upfront and tell you the truth. It's a world where people will feign friendship to get what they want. That's the world we live in. And the world we live in and the nation we live in, without God, it's hopeless. It's just a matter of time. In Romans 1, you can write down Romans 3, verses 11 to 18. Paul quotes from the Old Testament, the last verse there, or the verse 17 of 11 to 18 says, the way of peace they haven't known. We have peace talks going out. We have peace talks going on. People saying, do this, do that, diplomacy, strike back, all these other things. The way of peace they haven't known. And they won't know. There's only one way to know peace. And that comes from God. So we can look at it and say, does the world need Jesus Christ to return? They don't even know that they need Jesus Christ to return. We know it. We know it. You know, talking about hate, one thing we can keep in mind as we see the hate in America and as we see the hate around us, Jesus Christ said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. When we see the hate, one day that's going to be turned on the people of God. Because the God of this world doesn't like good. He doesn't like good. He doesn't like anything of God. And we see around us the seeds of that's happening. Well, Jesus Christ said, if I don't return, no flesh would be saved alive, no flesh would survive. But for the elect's sake, for those people who God has called, who have yielded to me and who are led by his Holy Spirit, for their sake, those days will be cut short. Before mankind can eliminate himself from earth or destroy the earth he lives on, I will return. I will set up a kingdom, and things will be different in that kingdom. There will be a return to a sort of Eden. Let's go back to Isaiah. You know, there's only one way, and those of you who have been in the church a long time, you remember one of the ministers from long ago that we all heard of. He would talk about there's a paradox in the universe. Mankind can do all these things. They can create fantastic things. And today we live in a world where we have internet. We can reach anyone around the world. We have TV, we have cars, we have rockets that can reach to the moon. Mankind can't even live at peace with his own family in so many cases. They don't know the answer. They don't know the answer. They know all the physical, but they don't know the spiritual and how to get along with one another. And that has to change, and that's not going to come from man. That's going to come from Jesus Christ and God the Father. When he returns, he says in Jeremiah 31, his spirit will be poured out on all flesh. They will understand then the things that you and I understand. They'll have the self-control that comes. Some of them will have the self-control. You read through and you see that some will still reject God. And life will be different. God will have to change the heart of man. It can't work until God changes the heart of man. Until the heart of man changes, we are a doomed world and a doomed set of creatures. And you know, when God does that, he's also going to change the nature of the animals around us. Let's look at Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11, verse 6. A millennial picture of what things will be like when the earth, man, and God and creation are in unity and dwelling together in peace and harmony. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze. Their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child will play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. When they know God's way, when they live God's way, when they have the spirit that God has put in you and me today, the world can be a different place. It's not going to happen until Jesus Christ returns. We can be very thankful that he promises that he won't let mankind destroy the earth or himself, and that he will return, and that you and I have a part in that plan that he has given to us. If we will just follow his ways, and if we will just yield to him.